The new league year has started, which means the signings are becoming official. The trades are becoming official. So Mikal Bridges officially a Knick now. And the Knicks did themselves some favors with the salary cap apron. So I'll get into how that's possible. Plus, the Knicks lost a pretty key part of their coaching staff on Saturday afternoon. So all that coming up next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notifications bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And today I'm going into just kind of, this is like a news dump episode. There's a lot that came out over the course of this weekend because we were at the end of the moratorium. So if you're not familiar with how things go in the NBA, the league year rolls over once you get to July 1st, teams are allowed to start talking to their players now well before that, but that's when the league year rolls over. Then there's a moratorium where teams are allowed to discuss with free agents and whatever, come to some agreements. And of course, teams come to some agreements that are more ironclad than others. There's been some famous times where players have, most notably, it was DeAndre Jordan a number of years ago, where a player will say that they're going to go one place, and then during the moratorium period, when contracts aren't actually signed yet, then be like, actually, never mind, I think I'm going to go somewhere else. It doesn't happen all that often, but the contracts aren't actually signed during the moratorium period. They're just agreed upon. And then once that period is over, then everybody starts signing. And so in the case of this year, it was July 6th. That was the date where everything could start going through. And that's why we saw a huge amount of news related to the Knicks today and a little bit on Friday as well, going into, hey, these deals are all done now. These things are all set. The Mikal Bridges trade was one of the big question marks where people were like, oh, how are the Knicks going to pull this off? How are they going to potentially skirt the first apron hard cap and get hard capped at the second apron, which gives them a lot more flexibility to absorb the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein, all that good stuff. So let's get into some of this news dump here. So first off, Johnnie Bryant leaves for Cleveland. So I don't know. This feels like pretty big news. I mean, it's the news that certainly nobody was ready for. I think the rest was mostly just confirmations of guys signing their contracts and, deals being completed that we already knew were going to happen. But Johnnie Bryant leaves. So he's still the associate head coach for Cleveland now. So he will be under Kenny Atkinson instead of Tom Thibodeau, which the kind of irony with that, I guess, that Atkinson was, if you remember back to when the Knicks were hiring their new head coach with Leon Rose, that Atkinson made it to, I think he was the second place finisher behind Tibbs when all was said and done. They interviewed a large number of candidates when they were looking for the position, and obviously we sort of knew Tibbs was the front runner given his connection to Leon and everything and their friendship and how long their relationship goes and all that good stuff. But it's kind of interesting that Johnnie Bryant is now going from the Knicks choice, which was obviously a great choice to take Tibbs back a number of years ago, to now going to the guy that was the runner-up for the Knicks job. But I think this probably has less to do with Kenny Atkinson and more to do with Donovan Mitchell. He's obviously great friends with Donovan Mitchell. The Knicks poached Johnnie Bryant from Utah, which was a big deal at the time because people thought that maybe that would mean that Donovan Mitchell would be coming to New York at a certain point, and that was one of the Knicks' first kind of forays into trying to appeal to Donovan Mitchell to get him in a Knicks uniform. at some point and, request a trade and all that. And obviously he did request a trade, but then wound up going to Cleveland. Now is re-up there. And so Johnnie Bryant, who worked with him a lot in Utah when they were both there, now finds his way back to Donovan Mitchell. So, it's kind of tough to fault anyone with the Knicks in the state that they are. It's tough to fault anyone for wanting to go work with their friends, since that's what the Knicks are all built on at the moment. So, I think it's good for Johnny. He probably got a pay raise to go there as well. If I had to guess, I can't imagine you would leave New York and the situation that they're in and how much success he's seen with the team here unless there was a pay raise involved. Still associate head coach, so he should be the first guy after Atkinson on the bench, most likely. And I mean, with how volatile a situation that could end up being, it's a super big superstar, just signed an extension. Bryant and Mitchell are friends. So maybe you run into a situation sooner and later, and maybe, it's just kind of part of the business, but maybe Johnnie Bryant looked at that situation and said, hey, I might get a chance to be a head coach here sooner than later than I would with the Knicks, because it seems like Tibbs is pretty well entrenched. I think we're going to see a Tibbs extension come through pretty soon. So he's going to remain the head coach of the Knicks for the time being and for a while going forward, I think. And so maybe Johnny just saw more of an opportunity to potentially find his own dream of being a head coach that way. But hopefully not too big of a deal. The Knicks did just sign Mo Cheeks as another guard coach recently. So, he's another former point guard and former head coach and everything else, and has lots of NBA experience and generally seems to have pretty high reviews around the league. So hopefully he's able to step in and fill some of that same void that Johnnie Bryant, will be leaving here at this point. But we also saw the Mikal Bridges trade go official. So official details of the trade now. Finally, we got them. The Knicks get Mikal Bridges and Keita Bates-Diop, which is great. They also, as far as I know, it wasn't listed on some of the sources that I saw, but as far as I know, they still get that 2026 second that is coming from the Nets that was initially reported on. And the Nets still should be getting that 2025 second round pick that the Knicks were saying to them, presumably their own second round pick back. But then the Knicks sent out to make this work. And I thought this was kind of hilarious that this was sort of right in front of us the whole time, but nobody really considered it, which is why people then had to be like, oh my God, are they going to trade away Deuce to make this work? Like, are the Knicks going to lose Deuce for nothing, and all this stuff? But they end up sending Bojan Bogdanovic, which was reported already, and then Mamadi Diakite, and then Shake Milton in a sign and trade. So that was the mystery final piece that made this deal work. Shake Milton gets signed and traded over there. I'm sure just having a guaranteed NBA contract at all is great for Shake for this year. So it's probably just like a 1-year deal, if I had to guess. Maybe even at veterans minimum or slightly above, like maybe $1 more than veterans minimum, so that the Knicks aren't aggregating veteran minimum salaries, which isn't allowed anymore with the new CBA rules, but still the same pick compensation. Obviously, those 4 unprotected firsts, and then the Milwaukee 2025 lightly protected first. And then again, presumably that 2025 second as well, which was not included in some of the final calculus, but I can't imagine that they pulled out those 2 second round picks. It seemed like that was part of the deal there. So but all the hemming and hawing about maybe losing Deuce, and all it took was a Shake Milton sign and trade. So just, another reminder, don't doubt Brock Aller, the Knicks capologist. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to get these things going and how to make sure that the Knicks can get out of these deals without being in a bad situation cap wise and pick wise and everything else. And, there's always a way. There's a will, there's a way. You can always get a deal done. But there was some other ramifications to this deal. Getting Bates-Diop, I think, could potentially be an interesting pickup for the Knicks, that they were able to pull him. So I want to get into that a little bit. Also want to explain the whole situation of where the Knicks stand salary wise now and how much flexibility they have, because that's actually going to lay some of the groundwork for a couple other episodes I have planned for this week. So I'll get into all that in just a moment. But first, I got to remind you all that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want, All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. I'll probably be looking at MLB All Star Weekend coming up. I always find, I don't know, all those events are always a lot of fun. I think to go ahead and you know, go place some bets on, go bet on the home run derby champ, stuff like that. They're silly, but you can make some pretty fun little parlays there potentially. And there's just it's easy, fun things to keep track of and bet on and have a little fun and add a little action to make some of those all-star events a little more fun. So whether it's the all-star game or the home run derby or whatever, I don't know, I find it to be pretty fun. It's the most consequential all-star game out there, so there's that going for it too, which is pretty fun. So again, head over to fanduel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, and I'm back in to keep talking through the final details of the Mikal Bridges trade. So, first, I want to talk about Bates-Diop and if the if it makes sense for the Knicks to keep him. I don't know. So he was drafted by the Tibbs Timberwolves in 2018, albeit that was shortly before Tibbs got canned. So I don't know. Maybe that was one of Tibbs's last bad moves. I don't know. I mean, he's had a pretty good NBA career since then. So maybe that was one of Tibbs' last good moves. It just was misunderstood at the time. But Tibbs obviously was president of basketball operations at that time. So for Minnesota, so stands to reason that he's a fan of KBD. So I guess we'll see if he ends up sticking as sort of like one of the Knicks end of bench vets going into this year. But I'd say there's probably a decent chance. He averaged 4 points, 2 boards, 1 assist in about 13 minutes a game last year. He's a career 33% 3-point shooter, but that's been trending down in recent years. Outside of he had a near 40% from three season in 2022 to 23 with San Antonio. And that was actually his most consistent volume year too. So he had about 2 attempts per game. So I don't know, maybe it stands to reason that he does better with a defined role and the opportunity to, let it fly a little more and shoot some more threes. And if that's the case, hey, maybe that's a path for him to find some playing time as sort of like the backup four on the Knicks a little bit. If they want to give Josh Hart a break, and if the rotation gets expanded back out to a 10-man rotation, then maybe he finds some time that way and can be a consistent 3-point shooter. And I think one thing that could really stand out, so he's a minimum contract guy, but I think you could do worse than having a tweener who rebounds well available on a Tibbs team. And I think he's a really good offensive rebounder too, which is a trait that this team desires. Like his offensive rebounding percentage is pretty high considering his height. So, I think that's something that Tibbs obviously values and this team obviously values for how they operate, as an offensive team. They like to have contingencies in place that if they miss the shot that they might get another opportunity. Granted, this team is I would say a little less reliant on the offensive rebounding strategy than they were 2 seasons ago now, because the 2 seasons ago it was kind of like Brunson was the only consistent shooter that you could count on, and it was a little hairy after that. Now it's I think you've got a lot of lights out shooters on this team. You have Brunson, you have Bridges, you have Anunoby, you have Dante DiVincenzo now coming off the bench as one of the best 3-point shooters in the NBA this past season. So maybe the offensive rebounding isn't that big of a deal, but I still think KBD maybe worth keeping around. So I think I don't know. I think it would be unlikely that the Knicks cut him. I think it's pretty likely that they'll end up keeping him going into the regular season and having him be sort of some of their end of bench depth that they, Tibbs at least has a good idea of like, hey, I think I can trust this guy. I drafted this guy. I like what he's become in the NBA. I think I can trust him, to be one of the last guys on my bench and maybe come in and contribute if need be at some point. Then as far as the cap situation for the Knicks and how the Mikal trade going through changes that. So obviously there's a lot of reporting about how if they had just sent out Bojan Bogdanovic to the Knicks as part of this deal and they took back more salary than they sent out, then they were going to be capped at the first apron. and that's where the Diakite and Shake Milton sign and trade came into play. And this now gives the Knicks a decent amount of wiggle room to finish out the rest of their roster here, which is nice. So, big shout out to Yossi Goslin on Twitter. It's at YOSSIGOZLAN. That's how you spell his first and last name. He noted and he's had a lot of really good capologist type stuff. So like if that interests you at all and you want to learn about this new wild world of the CBA, he's definitely a good follow. But he said the New York Knicks are now 16.9 million below the 188.9 million second apron with 11 players. They have enough flexibility to re-sign Precious Achiuwa and use the $5.2 million taxpayer mid-level exception. So in layman's terms, I mean, that was pretty good layman's terms, but I'll just try to explain it a little further. Basically, the Knicks are now, they're soundly over the salary cap. So if you're thinking to yourself like, oh, so why can't they just spend 16, 17 million? You know, they have 17 million of room before they hit this hard cap that they're capped at. Why can't they just go drop that on one player or whatever? Not that there's even any players really available at this point that I think would be worth that much money anyway. But either way, it's not that. It's not just pure cap space for them. It's just the amount that they can still use via maneuvering to fill out their roster, but they have limited amounts that they can give out to certain players. So Precious Achiuwa, they do not have a limited amount because he's a restricted free agent. So they can re-sign him now. And, you know, if he wants, like, I think they're probably still letting him kind of set his market a little bit and then come back with whatever number if he finds one. But, you know, maybe Precious and his agent are still hoping that some team like the Jazz or the Pistons or something will throw him like 10 million a season or something like that. But my best guess is that the Knicks probably end up signing him for like 6-7 million a season, maybe like a 3-year, like $21 million deal, something like that, to get him paid and, you know, utilize the fact that they can go over the cap to re-sign him. And then they also have, as Yossi said, they still have the $5.2 million taxpayer mid-level exception as well. So that's another exception that they can use to sign someone for $5 million for up to 2 seasons. Or I think it has to be exactly 2 seasons. I think it has to be a 2-year, like 10 point. It would be slightly more than 10.4, 10.7, $10.8 million deal, whatever that ends up being. But yeah, so I think that's basically the gist of it. They can pay Precious Achiuwa, you know, more than the minimum and like basically up to whatever his market value is, as long as it's not $17 million, which it won't be. And then they also can spend another 5 million. And then beyond that, whatever other roster spots they sign, which I think would only be like 1 or 2 more beyond that, would have to just be minimum contracts. Maybe that's Kevin McCullough and Ariel Hook-Porty. Maybe it's those two. I don't know, but you know, or maybe they sign one of those two to a 2-way deal and they try to get another, you know, veteran on a minimum deal, which I have some candidates for that that I'll go into in an episode tomorrow or maybe 2 days from now. I got some candidates for both the minimum spots and the taxpayer mid-level exception. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways they can go, but what's nice is that they have some more flexibility, and they're able to kind of fill this roster out and absorb the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein as best they can a little better. And, you know, whether that's via a trade or, you know, just making some signings or whatever, they have the ability to do that. So that is important going forward. And also should be noted that hard capping is only for this year as well. So, for example, if Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle re-up their contracts via extensions that kick in next year, that's okay. The Knicks were only hard capped at the second apron because of making a trade while being over the cap this offseason. So that's the league's way of being like, well, you've made your move. You're not allowed to make too many more. Or like you're not allowed to make like 3 separate trades where you bring in more salary than you're sending out, or something like that, which in the past wouldn't have been an issue. You know, the league didn't care about that before. Now they do, apparently. And so that's part of the rules now. But going forward, the Knicks can still use like extension eligibility, you know, restricted free agency rights, bird rights, stuff like that. They can still use those to re-sign their free agents going forward. It's just restrictive this year because of the timing of when they made their trade. But the Knicks also officially inked the OG Anunoby deal and officially inked two of their rookies. So that was also news this weekend. So going to get into that in just a sec. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And, it's sometimes you can tend to compare your life to others. So, like, does social media play a part in that? Maybe it does for you. Or, maybe you're just talking to someone and it creates, makes you feel inadequate or whatever. You feel like you're not far enough along in your life or whatever. And comparison can be the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram or whatever, but in reality, they probably don't. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. I certainly go through this all the time, and I used to, especially when I felt like I wasn't far enough along in my career or whatever. I would just constantly be comparing myself to my peers and people in the Knicks space, whatever, like in this general space. But even just in my day to day, this isn't my day job. Like, and I found that for a long time I didn't have a fulfilling day job or whatever, and I didn't feel like I was getting the most out of my professional life, and that was bleeding over into my self-worth based off how I compared myself to others. So you can go through these sort of things, and I probably didn't do enough therapy for that at the time, but don't repeat my mistakes. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. All right, and I'm back in to keep going through the Knicks news of the weekend. Again, big first day of official, I guess the official new league year, or official end of the moratorium, where deals are allowed to now be officially announced. And the Knicks officially announced the OG Anunoby deal. So just in case you were at all worried that there would be some sort of a back out and things wouldn't work out there, it's officially official. 5 years, 212.5 million, starting at around 37 million or so this coming season. OG Anunoby will be a Knick for quite some time. And I think based off what was built into that deal, which I think I saw there's a trade kicker. There's not a no trade clause, but there is a player option later on in it. It seems like he wants to be a Knick, and he wants to be on this team and make things happen here. Probably get more opportunities here for endorsements and stuff than he would get with any other team, considering he's a little more soft spoken guy and everything too. So I think he's here for the long haul. So the Knicks now have locked up, hopefully for a while, a really nice core of their starting five, and their top three bench players are all pretty well locked up and probably about to lock themselves in further. I would imagine that Jalen Brunson and possibly Julius Randle will sign extensions a little later this offseason. And then Mikal Bridges would be eligible to do the same thing next offseason prior to the final season of his contract, I think. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if those guys all re-up and everything. But my inclination would be yes. And it seems like the Knicks have their core locked up, and now it's just filling in the margins and hopefully they're getting ready to, really make something happen and maybe get deep in the playoffs this year. Then Tyler Kolek signed for 4 years, 9.06 million. That kind of raised my eyes a little bit. I was like, whoa, you're not kidding. Like that's a solid contract. That's the maximum of what the second round slots allow now. So the NBA, as part of this new CBA, has introduced a little different of a system for second round picks, where it used to be more like the Wild West, where you kind of just had to sign them with cap space. You could sign them to like a minimum contract, just like any other player. But if you want to sign them more than that, you had to use cap space, which led to a lot of teams using, the Knicks would do this in the past sometimes, like using part of your mid-level exceptions, to just give your second rounders a little bit of extra money or whatever. But now to try to create an environment where teams, bring in draft picks and whatever. And with this new landscape with all the aprons and the more restrictions, they did throw teams at least one bone and say you get an actual second round exception now where you can sign guys for a little more than the minimum, even if you're over the cap, and that's okay. Which is kind of similar to how things work with first round picks. So, yeah, I would say with that number, I mean, so Ian Begley noted this, a couple others did. Most guaranteed money ever for a second rounder, $6.6 million. So I think it's pretty clear the Knicks must have had a first round grade on this kid. They definitely felt very fortunate to have gotten him where they did, I guess, because they paid him like a first rounder. I mean, I think he's making almost as much as Dadiet is, which I'll get into in just a sec. But yeah, kind of interesting there, where it's like, yeah, he's making a good chunk of change for a second round pick. So that kind of begs the question, like, is he going to crack the rotation this year? Maybe if Tibbs is willing to kind of move back to like a 10-man rotation or play small consistently, maybe he's going to be out there with Deuce. Maybe they don't really need to look for another backup point or whatever, or maybe they won't go with Deuce at the one and then play, sort of like Deuce surrounded with shooters, with Dante and Hart and whatever. Maybe they envision Kolek coming in there and sort of running things with Deuce as the two. I don't know, but the money suggests they're very invested in this kid. So they clearly want to keep him around. And they didn't sign him to like a bargain basement deal, but like if they tried to do that, then his agent probably would be like, well, we only want like 1+1 deal or something like that. We're not going to stick around here and keep making below market value for that long if you're going to give us the bare minimum. So maybe this is the Knicks way of kind of just being like, no, we want you on a longer contract. We want to make sure that we can, oversee your development and, potentially find some minutes for you and whatever. I don't know, but they definitely locked him up. So that's good to see from the Knicks perspective, locking up one of their draft picks to a nice long deal. They also signed Pacome Dadiet. So he's officially signed. He only signed for 80% of his first round draft slot max for year one, which saves almost $1 million off the Knicks cap for this season. So that's an interesting wrinkle. But that was, I guess, sort of written off for the Knicks had to pay almost a $1 million buyout to Ratio Farm, his German club. So maybe that's where that came into play, where they said, well, we have to pay this buyout. So we're going to take this. You're going to just take a little bit of a haircut on your NBA salary this year to make this happen. And then I don't know if they're paying the buyout to the club, I don't know if that some of that money ends up going to Dadier or not. Either way, he's still going to be compensated fine, I think. And then going forward, he'll be making, I think it was like 120% of the slot or whatever, which means that he's going to be getting his raises and we'll be getting some of that money back later on too, just through scheduled raises every year on his rookie deal with his rookie slot. So I think he'll be okay. But yeah, interesting that the Knicks were able to finagle saving $1 million or so off their cap for this season, which is then, of course, money that they can spend elsewhere while they're hard capped right now. But yeah, and I guess the big thing with Dadier then is it makes it officially official that he's playing for the Knicks this year. I know there was some speculation, like on draft night, like, oh, is he going to be a draft and stash, whatever? And he said he's playing. The Knicks didn't seem to say anything to imply that he was not going to be playing. So, no more questions about that. He's definitely going to be playing for the Knicks this year. Really excited to see what he's got going on. I'm really excited to see the Summer League this year. The Knicks with 4 draft picks. So that'll be something to keep an eye on towards the end of this coming week. But the Knicks still have some money to spend. They still have some roster to fill out. So in my next episode, I'm going to get into some of the center candidates that the Knicks can look at, whether it's by an in-house option whose name you might have heard already in this episode, or a couple trade options that have been floated, or some guys that could be some sort of like reclamation projects that maybe could be the next Isaiah Hartenstein that the Knicks, hand to Tibbs and say, turn this guy into a true blue NBA player, and he goes and does it. So I've got some names to bring up. So that's going to be in the next episode. But for today, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.